Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma 221 here, back in data about Kagurabachi, chapter number 72. This chapter is titled Future. And indeed, this chapter really gives us a look not only into the past and a bunch of lore things about not only the Seitai War, but who the Sword Saint or Sword Master is, depending on what translation you read or whatever. I of course read the Viz translation, so I always have it translated as Sword Master, but I also just love the ring of Sword Saint and think it really works show how the wielder of the Shinichi or Magatsumi is on a completely different level than anybody else in the Kagurabachi series, and as we'll really be learning the links that of course the Shinichi wielder or the Magatsumi wielder, the Sword Saint, he's got a name pretty much, so I should just call him by that name, but sometimes I'm you know what, maybe if I don't do that. But either way, such an interesting chapter of Kagurabachi, not only looking on the past, but also the possible future of the Kagurabachi series, and just a lot of really interesting lore about the Enchanted Blades. There's just honestly so much that this chapter gives us. This is honestly probably one of my favorite Kagurabachi chapters ever. I mean, I said last week on the chapter number 6, one reviewed hey, I really thought this chapter was amazing. I love seeing the whole stuff between Iori, Inori, and Saumra, really learning how that relationship came to be. But this chapter fulfills that niche of hey, this is a flashback. But within this flashback, there's also just so much craziness of hey, we'll be talking about all of that. I really don't need to get too far ahead of myself, just to say hey, really good chapter of Kagurabachi that I really, really enjoyed. I mean, I really don't think I have a single issue with this chapter. I mean, Takeru Hokuzono, of course, the good old manga, he just really executed all of this extremely, extremely well. And hey, I also just want to quickly point out that at the time this video is coming out, the next chapter of Kagurabachi has not come out yet, and that is a sentence I can very rarely say because I am very bad at making videos on time sometimes, alright? I'm in college, I've got a lot of stuff to do sometimes, so hey, this video should be the 10th upload in a row on the channel, so 10 consecutive days, and I'm willing to say that, and then the video is not going to get uploaded on time, so I'm going to feel really, really bad about all of that, but hey, either way, really awesome chapter of Kagurabachi. And before we hop into this one, of course, chapter number 72, let's talk about what happened last time in chapter number 71 of Kagurabachi. As I alluded to here a few minutes ago, of course, last chapter was the beginning of this little bit of a flashback where it's hey, we learn about Saumra's wife, Inori, and of course that is in contrast Iori's mother, Inori. I know, great naming convention, Takeru, but going through all of this various stuff, we learned that hey, Inori has some sort of sickness and to where she really can't get out of the hospital, so Iori has to stay with Saumra a good little while, and Iori and Saumra start to really get this bond over being mini rivals with each other, pretty much we see a whole cooking competition in the last chapter where it's hey, Saumra and Iori really want to make something nice for Inori, so it's hey, they work together, make this thing, and at the very end of the chapter, we see that Inori passes away, and Saumra pretty much says hey, I'm sorry for everything I put you through in the past, thank you for giving me a daughter once more. It's a really honestly nice moment. Of course, Iori is very, very sad about all of this. Hey, my father is now taking care of me, but my mother has died. This isn't amazing whatsoever. This is terrible. And the very end of last chapter was, of course, right after Saumra's wife's funeral finished up, we see none other than Yura approach Saumra's house and pretty much say hey, I'm here to talk about a lot of things that a lot of sins that you guys committed, and what will befall this place in the near future, right? And it's on that note that we end, of course, chapter number 71, and we start off chapter number 72 in the exact next moment. As, of course, Yura has just walked in and just said, hey, I'm here to talk about the lot you sins committed. I honestly don't remember the whole correct last wording. I don't really feel like going back and also looking it up. But either way, right as he says this, Saumra just is hey, whoever you are, give me a break. My ex-wife's wake just finished, right? And we see that Yura is just oh, I'm so sorry, but I simply had to thank the great hero. And Saumra is silent for a second, what are you talking about? As Yura just says, hey, the Seitai War started when they invaded. The citizens of that small country were bloodthirsty savages by nature. Their bodies were resistant to the Dotenseki. Their invasion advanced steadily. As everyone knows, our heroes and their enchanted blades turned the tide of the battle. The heroes succeeded in eradicating the citizens of that nefarious small country. And thanks to our heroes, every last one of them was wiped out. Our country was protected. And Yura goes into this little bit of like a small thing, as we really just get panels focusing on the eyes of Yura, like Yura just looking forward almost into the soul of Saumra, right? As Saumra thinks back to the line that, of course, Yura had at the end of last chapter, and he just thinks like, oh, the sins you lot committed and disaster that will befall, and Saumra just says like, hey, I don't think that's what you came here to say, right? And you're just like, oh yes, I know the truth, the events that led up to the eradication, the story the public doesn't know. And we see in this moment, Saumra's had a cigarette in his mouth the entire time, and we just see Saumra's like face like really start to form into a frown as he's like, oh, what does this guy know, and what is he about to say? Well, Yura just continues saying like, hey, when the Shinichi emerged, it turned the tables on the enemy. Of course, Shinichi is the same thing as Magasumi. Shinichi pretty much just means like the pinnacle, and the Magasumi is the pinnacle of all of the enchanted blades, so that's why it's of course referred to as the Shinichi in some places and not in others, right? As Yura pretty much says like, hey, when it emerged, it turned the tables on the enemy. We waged a powerful counter-offensive, rapidly driving them back. I have never seen the word counter-offensive written out like this, and it is crazy just like how big of a word that really is. Like, it's really just taking counter and offensive and shoving them together, but hey, alas, right? Yura just continues saying like, hey, the heroes encroached into the enemy's territory. At this point, the end of the war was in sight. The enemy flew a white flag. Bloodthirsty savages. We were taught to call them that from our textbooks. But in reality, human beings are individuals. Physiologically, that nation's inhabitants had a unique genetic resistance to Dot and Seki. But they were still human. The royal family who led the invasion were deposed. They chose to surrender in order to prevent further casualties. As in a moment as Yura's going through all this, we see a little bit of an image where like we see who presumes to be either a mother or like a brother or a father or whoever holding a young child in their arms, pretty much as this kid who's obviously seems to be from this island nation that, of course, island nation of Shikoku that went and then attacked the main island of Japan and like the whole Seitai War stuff. Presumably this is a person from back then, and we just see that like they're all sad, just like sitting here and crying over like all the casualties that have been going on, right? And we then see as Yura continues like, hey, they signed a treaty, and for a time peace was established. As we see a panel of what seems to be a few members of the Shikoku Island Nation and also a few members of the Kamunagi, all standing around a table of like two chairs on either side, all signing a document together, right? And I find it a little bit interesting of the few Kamunagi members who are actually here in this moment. We see the Kamunagi leader, who's like the big guy with like that big puffy hair thing and like the whole mustache. We have seen him referenced as the Kamunagi leader a few times, right? We see the short, white-haired Kamunagi member. He's actually brought up later in this chapter of Kagurabachi. He's got like that black tuft of hair, right? Inside of his like big yellow afro pointy thing almost. And we also, from what it looks like to be, it seems like we see the Kamunagi member. Let me sort of like increase what I see here on my screen. Yeah, it looks like this is the Kamunagi member who has like the very long protruded earlobes. So I don't know if this is like all of these Kamunagi members who we see. We also see another guy sort of sitting there. It looks like they have a mustache of some type, but like we can't really get a good look on them. I mean, there's just like one panel from one angle, and like they're in a black suit. They could legitimately be anybody, right? But as Yura says this, we then cut to see a image of the Sword Master, Sword Saint, whatever you want to call them. We see them just standing there, and they just say, no, they must be annihilated. And as he pretty much just says this in a moment, we can tell, like, this was what was said a long, long time ago. Yura just continues saying, like, hey, one of the heroes who had trod over countless corpses during the war went berserk. The strongest of the enchanted blades responded. The true realm of an enchanted blade conforms to its master. As we just get the word malediction, as that is what the true realm of the Magatsume is called. As Yura pretty much explains, like, the abilities that the Sword Master invoked were a force of pure obliteration. The immensity of that power, the Shinochi and the Swordmaster consumed each other. Then all reason vanished, and the calamity that ensued was beyond virtue or evil. The calamity that beset that small nation laid waste to roughly 200,000 lives. As we just see these images of a bunch of skulls, and wrapped around all of these skulls, death, destruction, a ruined landscape, is nothing but greenery and plant life, just simply showing up here and showing the true destruction that is wrought by the Magetsumi, and of course, its ultimate ability, malediction. And that's like, whoa, like just these panels, it's like so crazy to see what's actually going on here. We see all of these butterflies, we see a few like centipedes and all of this stuff going around. It's like, hey, we saw a little bit of this during the fight with Yura during the whole Rakuzachi arc, but like, just thinking about the guy who actually wields that enchanted blade and the power that they're able to call upon, it's just, wow. Takeru Kozono, this is some amazing screen setting, right? Yura's narration just continues saying like, hey, it was only afterward that the 5 other enchanted blade bearers were able to stop him. The Swordmaster remains locked away to this day. That's the real story of the cleansing of that country. The truth is, the Swordmaster is the worst murderer who ever lived. But this country was still in chaos, reeling from the invasion. To reestablish stability and avoid further confusion, they hid the truth and enshrined the Swordmaster as the hero who defeated an evil enemy. As we see what we presume to be a statue of the Swordmaster whenever he was much younger, when he was sort of lauded as this hero, as Saumra just thinks like, wait, how much does this guy know? As Yura just is like, hey, how can we blame them? It was for the good of the future. Oh yes, the future. As for the reason for my visit, I came to deliver a prophecy. And Saumra's like, a prophecy? Like you care to explain? As Yura just says like, hey, so long as the Sword Master lives, that calamity known as the malediction will occur again in the near future in this country. And Saumra's like, no, you're wrong, that can't happen. But Yura's like, hey, Seichi Saumra, you have a job to do. As the door behind Saumra begins to rattle in this moment, right? And Saumra's like, oh, what is that behind me? As Yura just says, for the future. As we see that he holds up his pointer finger and his middle finger up in front of him, and like that sort of like, hey, I'm about to disappear now, like we always see Shiba use. As we see his body starts to become almost like flame and get whisked away in flames. As we see Iori walks outside and she's like, oh, hey, Dad. And Saumra's like, oh, hey, you're awake. And Iori's like, oh, hey, who was that? A calamity? Like, a job to do? Like, do you have to go somewhere, Dad? And Saumra's like, oh, you heard that? Like, hey, I'm not going anywhere. As we see that he sort of comes in, like, just pats her on the head and sort of just leads her inside and closes the door behind him. But before he does, Saumra just, like, takes a look outside. Granted, Saumra can't see any of this, so it's, like, the whole thing of, like, yes, Saumra looks somewhere, but he can't actually see that. As he sort of looks towards the area of the gate wherever Yura just walked through, and Saumra just glances over in that whole thing of, like, who was that, right? At this point, we cut scene away from here. I can only imagine that Saumra just says, like, hey, Yori, go to bed now. I've got a whole lot to think about. Like, your mother just died. Like, you should not be just, like, up and moving around at this point, right? But either way, we see that Saumra then goes to the Kamunabi Headquarters, right? As we see the short Kamunabi member, he's one of the big 3 guys. We don't know his name, which is, like, great. I absolutely love this, right? But we see that he sort of comes over. I'm just going to call him, like, Tough or, like, Hair Tough or something like that, right? Because, like, that's really all we know about him. But we're going to see that Tough's just like, hey, long time no see, Saumra. Like, it's not like you to particularly reach out. As we see that Saumra is just sitting on a couch in the moment, right? And Saumra's like, oh, yo, like, you've aged, like, hobbling around like an old geezer, right? And let's just call him Geezer. And Geezer's just like, hey, ain't you, chickie? I'm still pretty spry for an old man. Like, how about this? you care to spar? And Saumra's like, you know what, maybe I think I'll pass on that, as he remembers back to a little bit of a long time ago, right? And he's like, hey, I remember when he was training both Shiba and Izami to fight, and both of the two of them weren't doing particularly well, all things considered, right? But either way, we see that the two of them are just sitting talking to each other. We see that Saumra has clearly smoked a few cigarettes, and this is really bringing him over to edge, really thinking about all of this various stuff, right? As we see that he has not only a cigarette currently resting in an ashtray, but also the remnant of one also sitting in there either, which is like, yes, that is pretty uncharacteristic for Saumra to actually go through and light the cigarette up, right? As we pretty much see that, Saumra's explained all this situation to Geezer, and he's just like, oh, so this man knew the truth about the Swordmaster. That's so. Well, only the core members of the Kabunabi and the nation's highest echelon know that. And Saumra's like, hey, I mean, perhaps he was involved back then, but his voice and scent were both, like, super unfamiliar to me, right? As we see the Geezer's just like, hey, and this man, if he says that he really knew the truth, said the malediction would beset this country next. I honestly don't know if it's malediction or malediction. Like, I think there's two different ways to say it. I don't really know which one's, like, the current consistent right now. Like, thinking about in Japanese, it'd be, like, a-i-u-e, so it'd be, malediction, or, but I would just, like, malediction. I don't know which one it particularly is, but anyway, it's like, hey, he said the malediction will beset this country next. And he's like, oh, a prophecy, huh? And he's like, well, it's like the dream of the monk Terran Raccoon, a sort of divination with no clear evidence. A possible disaster, in other words. This is a bit of a new thing, of the prophecies of the monk, what is it, Tin Raccoon? It's like, we've never heard of this guy before, but it's pretty cool to be like, okay, maybe the Kabunabi gets some sort of, like, prophecies from somewhere, and it's like, a real baseless thing of, like, hey, it's sort of like that whole thing of, like, hey, if somebody is going to die, it can, like, twist it into anywhere, like, somebody's going to win the war. Well, it could be you who win the war, but it could be the enemy who wins the war. So it's, like, the really interesting thing of, like, okay, this is a little bit of, like, a cool thing of, like, some monk purple, right? But either way, Saumra just says, like, hey, so are you saying that it's possible? And Geezer's just like, hey, to prevent such a thing, the Swordmaster has been imprisoned deep underground, and the Shinichi has been isolated in a separate place. And of course, with the time frame that we are working with here of when did our flashback start? Let me actually, this is the time where I've got to actually duplicate the chapters, and we are going to go back to chapter 71, right to the beginning of it, where it says, yes, it was 9 years ago, which means that it's been about a year since Inori was sort of in the hospital. Saumra refers like, hey, you hung in here for years, that's pretty good. So we're looking at about 8 years ago, which definitely means like, hey, currently the all of the various enchanted blades are with Kudashige at his workshop, where of course Chihiro is, and the two of them are living together really happily ever for now, if I'm going to say, if that's really what it is. Happily ever for now is a pretty funny thing, in my opinion, right? But of course, that's sort of the timeline we're looking like. And then it seems in 5 years, that is when the whole thing will be going down. It's like, yes, Kunishige is killed, right? But either way, Geezer just continues saying, like, hey, and so pretty much the Sword Saint and the Blades have been separated into different places so that the two of them could never come into contact. But as long as the Sword Master and the Shinichi remain in this world, that possibility exists. To completely extinguish it, we would have to execute the Sword Master. But as you know, that's not possible. The eternal contracts, these life and death spells, are immensely sophisticated. It would have been extremely cumbersome to enact multiple spells at once. And for that reason, Rokuhira used the Shinichi as its core and assigned it to the Swordmaster, his most trusted ally. We will be getting to this in a second. Like a master-slave configuration, he linked them together to establish the contracts. Because of this configuration, if the Sword Master at the nucleus dies, the bodies of the other linked sword bearers will deteriorate, and within 2 days, they too will perish. As we get this really awesome, interesting visual of chains wrapping around a human heart. And we see all of these chains are wrapped around, and along with that, the chains that are wrapping around the main Shinichi blade, we see they're all wrapping around, and it's sort of like this bigger, massive, or like bigger core pretty much. And on the edges of it are 5 other orbs, of course, representing the other 5 enchanted blades, which is like, okay, this really brings a very interesting twist. If you're going to kill the Swordmaster, you have to kill the rest of the sword bearers. It's so interesting. It's so well written. Takeru Hokuzono, you're a bad man, right? But either way, we just sort of get some continued narration saying like, hey, like shogi pieces that fall when the king falls, the enchanted blade bears accepted that risk as they entered the war. How could they know their comrade would become their enemy? And he just says like, hey, if we execute the Swordmaster, you and the other contracted owners of the enchanted blades will die. And Saumra's just like, hey, but if we don't do something, as Gizurus is like, hey, calm down, Saumra. This isn't like you. And he's like, yes, I understand that you are caring for your daughter now. So that's why you're very concerned for the future. And Saumra's like, yes, it is. Sorry about, like, getting all overboard like that, right? Gizurus says, like, hey, the possibility still exists, but it is extremely slim. Very few people know that the Swordmaster and the Shinichi are under the tightest security imaginable. As long as the Swordmaster and the Shinichi are sealed and isolated, there is no concern. We don't need you to sacrifice your lives for such a slim possibility. What the Swordmaster did is a horrible crime that we must somehow atone for. But to the very end, the rest of you fought to save the citizens, not to kill the enemy. Saumra, you are heroes. You all have done enough. Let us handle the rest. You and your daughter have futures to live for. And that is where we end this little bit of a conversation between Saumra and one of the old geezers of the Kabunabi. It's like, man, this is a very interesting little thing of like, okay, we learn about the Swordmaster, we learn about all of these nucleuses and how this all sort of ties together, and how even though the Kabunabi knows the situation, but they still laud Saumra and the rest as the heroes of the war. And, of course, the Sword Saint as the villain. It's so very interesting, right? Well, to finish up the chapter real quick in our last 3 pages, we cut back over to the dojo where, of course, Saumra trains all of the various cops of the city. I don't know if that's saying, like, they are the Kabunabi or if they're just, like, some just love, like, the regular sword cops, pretty much. We don't really quite know all the situation here, right? But what we see happening is we see that some person is sparring with Yuri, right? And I really love the moment here as the hairstyle this guy has is very reminiscent of like what we would think Chihiro's hairstyle would look like if he was like very, very much younger. But of course, at this time in his life, Chihiro was, what do you call that? A crew cut? No, he had a buzz cut pretty much. And of course, he was living up with his father, Kunoshige. So like, this would have never really been that situation. Also, Chihiro didn't know any training with a sword, but it is pretty cool to see, like, oh, this kid just really looks like Chihiro and, like, Yuri, and, like, of course this isn't the two of them meeting, but it's sort of a bit of a fun and sort of interesting thing, right? We see that Yuri is going through, and it looks like she's using the EI White Purity style. She's, like, holding the sword upside down. We also see that she has her eyes closed as she goes through and knocks one of the wooden training swords out of this other Chihiro-looking student's hand, right? And we see that Saumra is standing in the back of the room, sort of watching but not watching all of this happen. That'll get brought up here in a second. And one of the guys just like, hey, she has her eyes closed, but like she can somehow sense the target. Like, how is that? As Saumra just says like, oh, well, she's constantly imitating me, and I guess she's sort of getting the knack of it. And the guy's like, oh, the knack, huh, right? As we see that Yuri sort of comes over and opens her eyes and sees the Chihiro-looking kid who she was fighting raise up a sword above his head and go, like, down to strike her with it. And we see that she's just completely scared, like, defenseless. Saumra just is like, well, actually, she seems more afraid whenever her eyes are open. As he just says, like, hey, closing her eyes eliminates extraneous thoughts. She can quietly concentrate and focus on wielding the sword. As we see the art guys just like, oh, that's incredible. Well, she's the daughter of the great hero Seitai Saumra after all. And of course, hearing himself being called a hero, Saumra is very silent, being that we know the whole thing of like, hey, Saumra does not view himself as a hero whatsoever, right? As we eventually see that Yuri runs up and says like, hey, Dad, did you see that? And Saumra, of course, who is blind, mind you, just says like, oh, yes, well done, right? And Yura's like, hey, isn't that right? I'm going to be the best fighter ever, and I'll protect you, alright, Dad? As we see that Saumra in this moment remembers what the Kabunabi geezer said, like, hey, you can live for the future. As Saumra just is like, is that so? Well, I can't wait. And that is where we end this chapter of Kagurabachi. And the first thing I want to talk about is, like, of course, we don't have the next chapter out yet, so I can really sit down here and do all my theory crafting, because there is a lot that we get in this chapter. Number one, I don't think this flashback is over yet. I think that we are going to get one more chapter, and if I had to guess, by the end of next chapter, or end of chapter 73, we will be cutting back to the all of the action at the Kyoto Bloodshed Hotel. If not, we will probably be cutting into Saumra to see sort of what Saumra is up to in this moment, right? Because, of course, we have not seen Saumra since, what? It was, like, chapter 59, if I'm not mistaken. It was either 59 or 60. Of course, let me go to all the full chapter list to go figure that out. It was whenever Saumra was sort of like running away from the whole situation after it was like, hey, the Sword Bearer assassination arc is going on. Yes, it was chapter 59, because of course he went and talked to all of the Hishaku guys, and it was just like, hey, one more week, and in one more week, it'll all be over. And the end of that chapter is, of course, like, hey, Chihiro was dead, but then he is awake again, right? It's like, the whole thing of like, oh, okay, what happened there is I mean, of course we know it was Saumra who, like, killed him and all that, but, like, either way, we haven't seen Saumra, really. I mean, we've seen him in flashbacks, but we haven't seen the current version of Saumra in about, what is that, like 13 chapters or so. So I think we're going to get a little bit more of the flashback next time, but, of course, like, really, we could go a number of places. We could see Iori sort of growing up a little more, maybe Iori and Chihiro interacting. But if so, this was also maybe a fine place to cut off the flashback on its own, right? Like, there's nothing leading in, like, of course, the whole thing earlier of, what was it, like, last chapter is Yura interacting, like, hey, we're going to get a bit more of this, right? Going to all this stuff with Iori here, it seems like Iori may know all of this prophecy now, because of course whenever she was younger, she heard it outside, and like, she seems to say that she heard most of it, like, hey, a calamity, a job you have to do, of course, and the Saumra sort of like takes her inside. So it seems like Iori may know a lot of this situation. Of course, the end of chapter number 70 was the whole thing going like, hey, and then she remembered everything. It's like all of her memories are going back to you. So it could be very interesting if she remembers everything. It's like, oh, the malediction is happening soon, and all of this various stuff. The calamity is about to beset the nation because of the Sword Saint and all of that various stuff, right? So it could be really, really interesting to see what Iori does this. And of course, in that sort of process, relays this information to Chihiro and all of the rest of the teams. Of course, like, we know that Shiba knows this. We know, like, Azami and a few of the higher up Kabunabi members know. Like, of course, all of the Sword Bears know. But, of course, this wouldn't have been something that, like, Kunishige would have told Chihiro of, like, hey, my most trusted ally, which is also, like, a random thing of, like, Kunishige, who was this person? I think one of the big running theories right now is that the Sword Saint is possibly related to Kunishige, or it was one of those situations where it's like, hey, in the past there were like 4 best friends. It was like Kunishige, it was Shiba, it was Izami, and it was the Sword Saint, right? Or the other way I think is like it could be like a brother or something of Kunishige. It's like the Sword Saint is like Chihiro's uncle or something like that. And in the same vein, it's a pretty interesting thing about, okay, what is Yura's relationship to all of this? How does he know all this? Like, is he possibly from the island nation of Shokoku? Because, I mean, the entire chapter, he refers to it as that small country. As, like, he never really says the name of the country. And, of course, we learned that, what, like a few chapters ago? Was that from Hirohiko? No, it wasn't from... I forget where we got all of the Seitai War lore dump. I forget who really expanded on all of that very stuff. No, it was Chihiro telling all of that to Iori while they were sort of resting in the Kyoto Bloodshed Hotel. That's what it was, right? So, of course, Chihiro knows a good amount of this, but we don't know if Chihiro knows about the Sword Saint and all of this various stuff. So it's a pretty interesting thing about, right, what is Yura's relationship to all of this? Like, is he related to Chihiro in some way? Is, like, he an offshoot of the family, knew Kunishige and all of this various stuff? The panel of the Sword Saint that we see in this chapter, I didn't point out at the time. This panel is crazy, and, like, oh my gosh, all I can say is Takeru Hokuzono, you cooked with this chapter for sure. Really, I don't particularly know what else I want to say. It seems very interesting that, like, Saumra is going and talking with the Kabunagi, like, hey, somebody seemed to know about all of this, and it didn't really seem like they particularly should have, but, like, either way they did. It's a little bit of an interesting thing there of, like, okay, that's, like, just different enough in a way, and, like, eventually, the reason I think we're going to be getting in our chapter to this is seeing Saumra eventually go to the Hishaku and being like, hey, you've convinced me I want to be able to protect my daughter's future, because, like, hey, it seems like in this moment, Saumra doesn't fully understand everything going on here. Well, he does, but, like, the whole thing is, like, living for the future and living for his daughter, Iori. And I think this sort of may wrap into the whole thing of, like, hey, he ends up killing off his daughter whenever Kunishige dies, pretty much, and then deciding to go through and fight in the Hishaku's stead for the whole idea of, like, hey, we need to kill the Sword Saint so my daughter can leave peacefully. And really, if all of that rambly stuff out of the way, I really don't know how much else I want to talk about this chapter. It was super, like, absolutely amazing. I love this chapter through and through. The whole metaphor of, like, the Sword Saints at the middle of this contract and the other 5 and Chain of Blade Wielders are on the outside. Of course, it doesn't seem like Chihiro is involved in this, being it's like, hey, Inten was probably formed out of a different realm of some kind, and, like, hey, for all we know, Inten could, like, have a different type of a kernel contract. Like, of course, all we've ever known is that Chihiro is the only one who's been able to wield it, but we honestly really don't know. And it also sort of lends the idea of, like, the whole, like, of course, the malediction seems to be pretty much just like, hey, this was the Sword Saint's Bankai, pretty much. Like, I'm not trying to, like, say that this series is Bleach, but it's like, hey, of course, like, you have the regular abilities of the sword, and then you level up the sword to make it do even more powerful stuff, and, like, yes, this is very similar to, like, what a Bankai is in general, but, yeah. Overall, great chapter of Kagurabachi. I love this chapter through and through, like, the whole idea at the end of the chapter of Yura being like, hey, I'm going to be the best fighter ever, and I'll protect you, Dad. Seems like there'll be some foreshadowing going forward, and I really feel that, like, Iori may get the final blow on Saumra if Saumra doesn't realize and end up killing Iori first. Like, I really do want Iori to be part of the team for sure, but in a series like this, we really don't know, because I was expecting Aruha to stay around. And you know what Aruha didn't do? Stay around. But with all of that out of the way, thank you guys so very much for watching this video on Kagurabachi, chapter number 72. Again, this chapter was titled Future. I think they said the word future, like, 7 or 8 times during this chapter. I don't feel like going back and counting them. If you really care that much, go back and count them, and leave that down in the comments down below, because of course, hey, if you enjoyed this video, I do plenty of other animated manga related content here on the channel. Of course, I've done a good amount of Kagurabachi chapter reviews at this point, and hey, if you really like the Kagurabachi chapter reviews, I've got the whole playlist. It'll not only be linked down in the description box down below, but it'll also be in an end card on this video, so all of that's pretty cool. I cover plenty of other anime manga content, so, like, if you want to hear my thoughts on Weekly Shonen Jump, well, I've got videos on all of those issues that are out right now, and not really every single one, because that'd be way too many to really do, but, like, each time a new one comes out, ever since, like, I think it was, like, issue 40 of last year, I've been very on top of getting a video out for each of them, right? But really, with all that out of the way, thank you guys so very much for watching this video on Kagurabachi. I normally don't say this, but, like, hey, if you liked it, maybe subscribe. That sort of is pretty cool. I feel bad always saying that, like, hey, if you think I earned your subscription, please give it to me. If I didn't, well, maybe a World Trigger video will do. Either way, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank all of the Bachi bros and all of that. And yeah, I'll catch you next time for Kagurabachi chapter number 73. Again, this was chapter number 72, titled Future. And yeah, I'll catch you guys next time, Bachi bros. This will be Glowplasma 231, signing out.